Duke, you suck.
You shut your mouth!
Welcome to the Duke You Suck podcast. And now, Duke Durango.
Everybody, welcome to the Duke You Suck podcast. I'm back after a little bit of a break. To be quite honest, things are getting a little bit hectic for Duke Durango and his wife. So yeah, I had to take a little break, kind of line some other things up. Today I wanted to come back. There's been a lot going on, obviously, in my world and the real world as well. And I think some of these things, people want addressed. Today I'm doing my new segment inspired by my new Dolly Parton t-shirt, What Would Dolly Do? For those of you that aren't Dolly Parton fans, I have a question: is what is wrong with you? Dolly Parton to me is somebody that you may not like her music, but her spirit and her energy are unmatched. And for me, she's my nominee for the new kind of the world's new Betty White, if you will. So anyways, kind of what's been going on recently. I had an opportunity. I returned to a wrestling ring for a, unfortunately, very brief stint. I was able to participate in the Calgary Hitmen's Bret the Hitman Hart Night, as well as PWA's Battle at the Dome 2 in the inaugural Bret Hart Cup. This was a great experience. I want to thank everybody at the Calgary Hitmen, Rob Kerr and both Amy's in particular, for making this experience, first of all, seamless. You guys are incredible at what you do. The utmost professionalism is what we received from the Calgary Hitmen, and I'm for one, I'm very, very appreciative of the Calgary Hitmen, their staff, and the experience that they provided for myself and the rest of the guys and gals in the PWA locker room. Also, obviously, a shout out to Prostate Calgary Center and as well as Bret Hart. I mean, what a better example to have for our city and for our country, for that matter of fact, than a guy with the integrity of Bret Hart. We're really, really, really lucky that Bret's been a part of our city and added so much to the fabric of our city with everything he's done for the wrestling, but also everything he's done being one of the founding owners of the Calgary Hitmen, along with Joe Sakic as well as Theron Fleury. People maybe don't realize that, and I think that those types of things like junior hockey and junior hockey or professional sports in general add a lot to the fabric of the city. Getting into there's whole other aspects to those conversations, but long story short, I, for one, appreciate everything Bret Hart has done for the city. And I think it's great that the Calgary Hitmen still recognize Bret the Hitman Hart for everything he did for that franchise and everything he continues to do for the franchise, as well as continues to do for the city of Calgary. So shout out to you for that, Bret, if you happen to see this. The other thing I want to do is quickly shout out the good brothers in the nation. They know who they are. These guys are longtime fans of Stampede Wrestling and PWA that I've become very good friends with over the years. And whenever I say I'm coming back, or whenever I say I'm doing something special, these guys are the first to get a hold of me, find out the details, and buy tickets and support the event. And so, yeah, guys, I just want to say thanks again to all of you for coming out and supporting everything, and to your wives for putting up with all of us, as my wife as well. But yeah, the nation, you know who you are. Love you guys. And again, thanks for coming out. Something that just happened yesterday. I'm recording this a little late. Something that just happened yesterday that I want to talk about very briefly is the passing of Scott Hall, or Razor Ramon. I'm going to just talk briefly about this because there's not a lot I can say that hasn't been said already about Scott Hall. He's not somebody that I knew personally, but can say that at a time when I didn't watch wrestling, he was just starting the Razor Ramon character. And it was something that I, quite frankly, thought was hilarious. He was the coolest bad guy ever. He ushered in the era of the cool bad guy, if that makes sense. And I think that his mark on the business won't be matched. And, Scott Hall will truly be missed. And my thoughts and prayers do go out to his family and friends and everybody that knew him, because, when you're in a position like Scott Hall's, you touch a lot of lives. And I don't think maybe some people realize how many lives a guy like him would touch. So again, rest in peace, Scott, because you deserve nothing but the best. On another really happy note, something I want to kind of tackle real quick. There's been a lot on social media, obviously in the news, about the Russia invasion of the Ukraine, and a lot of us have opinions on things like this, and a lot of us, kind of don't know our ass from a hole in the ground when it comes to these type of world events and what's going on, and sort of these types of foreign policy decisions that go into it. And I, for one, am at the top of the list of that. I'm not calling anybody out here. The one thing I do want to say is that to those people that are taking to their social media pages and putting up, pictures of Ukrainian soldiers and calling out people in the trucker convoy and saying things like, this is what freedom looks like. To those people, I would just say, please tread lightly. I don't necessarily agree with the politics of the trucker convoy. And again, that's a different conversation I don't want to get into right now. But what I would say is, in countries like the Ukraine and Russia and places where they have mandatory conscription and mandatory military service, those people really know the cost of freedom. And I would say the average one of us that's never served in the military, that's never picked up a gun to serve our country and fight and preserve for the blanket of freedom that we sleep under every day, probably should be really cautious saying this is what freedom looks like when most of us have never actually had to pay the price. So please, let's treat each other with kindness and care and love. Let's agree to disagree where we have to. And, let's just extend a hand in partnership and look for that common ground we have. I mean, it's easy to call each other out and say, what each of us are doing wrong, but all of us have things we could do better or differently. And I think it's extremely important that we, instead of using conflict to even polarize us further, that we start for looking away in the conflict that we can't find common ground. Because I think at the end of the day, most of us have more common ground than we have stuff that separates us. But, as human nature dictates, we will generally focus on the negative and the stuff that separates us rather than the stuff that's going to bring us closer together. If you honestly ask my opinion, I'll share it. And it's very easy to say from my desk. But again, we're doing a segment called What Would Duke Do? Quite frankly, again, this is easy to say from a desk in my basement, but I don't believe that putting economic sanctions on a country like Russia, who would have no problem using backdoor channels with a country like China to make deals and sell arms and create income that way, I don't think those are realistic solutions. Do I want to send Canadian soldiers or any soldier for that matter into harm's way against Russia? I don't. The concern there is that Russia does have nuclear weapon capability. So it's really easy for me to say roll the tanks in, but when you're dealing with a psychopath that kills media members, by the dozen, you never know what he's going to do. And obviously, when you deal with communist governments, and I'm not talking about the people in Russia or the people in China, I'm talking about the governments. When you deal with these types of governments where human life is literally worth nothing, to threaten them with nuking them back isn't necessarily a threat, because the people at the top that are making these decisions probably see most of their citizens as expendable, as long as it's, for the good of the party. So, there's a diplomatic oversight there that most of us don't have a depth to even understand. So let's just be careful with how we talk to each other and how we, kind of proceed on these types of issues. I think tread lightly would be the best kind of best choice of phrase I would use at this time. What I want to do right now is quickly kind of get into the segment, What Would Duke Do? This is something I was started, inspired by my Dolly Parton t-shirt. She's somebody that is a human being that I'm a huge fan of. And, if any of you guys are interested, there's a great documentary on Netflix that, really shows who Dolly Parton is and kind of what kind of human being she is. And I think that, if more of us looked at the world the way Dolly Parton did, it would probably be a much, much better place. At this point, I'm actually going to get into some of the questions. Now, this is more of an advice segment. So I'm going to try, some of these questions weren't necessarily advice questions, but I'm going to try and break it down into, third person myself to tell you what would Duke do with this advice, perhaps. So my good friend Ivan Thompson, who I need to get on this podcast, by the way, Ivan, Um, he asked me a question: what's the most difficult time I ever had working a match where things just weren't meshing right? I think all of us that have been spent any time in pro wrestling um, have, or and if you haven't, you certainly will have matches where things just don't go right either. Everybody has a bad day at work, so maybe you're just having a tough night, or perhaps you just don't have chemistry with the person you're in the ring with, which happens. So I'm not going to get into when that happened because like I say, it happens to all of us, and it'll happen to you more than once through your career. So Wayne Gretzky didn't score every time he shot a puck, so don't think that every match is going to be, a 10 out of 10. But the one thing, the advice I would give to the young men and ladies in the business right now is that you're going to have these times, and you're going to have matches that where the wheels, what I use the phrase, where the wheels fall off. And the one thing I can tell you is don't get discouraged with that, because it does happen to everybody. Just keep working, work through it. Don't dwell on it when you're finished. There's going to be times when you're in the middle of a match and the wheels are coming off, and you just can't, what I call get it back. You just can't kind of rein it back into where you need it to be. And again, that's okay. Like it's going to happen. Not everybody has their best day at work every day. But what you do is take what you can learn from it and move on from it. You do not dwell on those matches. It's hard sometimes when you have long spans between matches. When you have a match that's a stinker and you don't have another match lined up for 2 weeks, that's 2 weeks to dwell on a match that was a really tough night. But, try to focus on, what you did good in the match, what was solid in the match, but also what can you do better? Where did the wheels fall off? Just like I say, try and find that learning experience, because you're going to learn, from the matches that stink, you're probably going to learn more from those matches than the matches where everything goes the way you wanted it to do, the way you want it to go. So I think that's a really, really important thing, is just, don't let your highs get too high. Don't let your lows get too low, because some days you're going to hit multiple home runs, and some nights you're going to strike out every time you go to the plate. So, but the law of averages, hopefully you hit more home runs than strike out. This next question is a really tough question for what would Duke do, but I think I'm gonna go with what I'd call low hanging fruit. My very good friend Dwayne asked me if I could change one event in Canadian history, what would it be? My answer isn't just being said because it's popular. My answer isn't being said because, that it's a sexy topic right now. But really, truly, my answer would be is how our Canadian government, or even let's go all the way back to how our first settlers dealt with our First Nations people. I think we can all agree that we did the first settlers in this nation, they did our First Nation peoples dirty. And I think we can all agree on that. So if there's anything I could change, and I don't know what that looks like, I'm not going to, kind of sit here and get into all the ideas of how things could have been done differently. But what I would say is if there's anything I could do, wave a magic wand and fix, it would be, the relationship and how our previous governments have dealt with our First Nation populations. Quite frankly, it's a disgrace. And if people understand why our First Nations brothers and sisters don't want to come to the table, it's because every time they come to the table, they've been lied to, mistreated, had the rug pulled out from under them. So it's very easy to say, just get with it, assimilate, which is what a lot of us people would say. But again, when you look at how our governments have treated historically our First Nations people, there's a reason to mistrust, a white government. And if you can't kind of put yourself in that position to see our First Nation side of it, it's going to be very, very tough to move forward with that conversation. Because obviously going forward, how things got handled in the past, obviously are having a huge, huge, huge impression on how our relationship is with our First Nation brothers and sisters moving forward. And it's very, very, very tough to go back in history and heal those wounds. And people don't understand that these are, the term that's going around right now are generational traumas that have been created, so to think that there's going to be a magic wand fix overnight, generational traumas are probably going to take generations to fix. And that's the unfortunate truth in all this. But I think the sooner this happens, the better. And I think that now that we're at least having the conversation, I think that that's, a positive step forward. What I would like to do is have my friends Wavell, Sequin, and Morris back on the program and see, what's changed in the conversation in the last year. To me, that's a really interesting question. Is once the conversation starts happening, do the wheels actually move? Is there change? Can they see effective change? Is a year too short to see any effective change? So yeah, Dwayne, that would be my answer to that question. That's a big question. Harmony Rice, who's a great supporter of this podcast, and an amazing human being, was asking a booking question. As many of you know, I did a lot of booking at an age when I was probably too inexperienced to be doing it, but somehow managed to sort of make it work with the crew of talent I had around. Simply because we had great talent around at that time who all had great ideas, were very creative and very unselfish in that they would give ideas unselfishly and make things work constantly. But Harmony's question is, what is a storyline that missed the boat, or one that I thought would miss the boat but didn't? Harmony, I'm going to be really honest and say that part of my career is kind of fuzzy, and I'm going to turn this again into a bit of an advice portion. One of the problems I had at that time is that I was booking and wrestling. So it's very, very hard to, work semi-main or main event storylines and focus a lot on the match, but also, write or come up with booking for two promotions, for multiple matches over the course. I like to try and book things, no less than 6 to 8 week programs, titles booked a year out kind of thing. So it was very hard to focus on any one thing. So to be honest with you, a lot of that's kind of a blur to me, what programs I did, even a lot of the matches I had. And it's one of the reasons I wish I would have kind of documented my career a little better, because it was, quite frankly, there was about a 5 or 6 year period where it was just a blur for me. The one thing where the advice piece comes from here is for all of my friends, and I know there's a couple of you out there for sure. Hopefully you'll see this and won't take it the wrong way. All of my friends out there that are bookers and wrestlers, I think do your best, if possible, to give the book to someone that isn't wrestling. And I don't say that to lobby for a job or a position in a company or anything. I simply say that for the reason that there's two problems with being a booker and a wrestler, or and a quote unquote talent. First and foremost is the perception of the booker's position within the roster. Now, one perception would be that if you're really good and you're, a top roster talent, there will be talent on the roster no matter what, that if you book yourself into the main event positions or book yourself into the title chase and book yourself into position as champion, that they'll simply, no matter how good you are and whether or not you should be at that portion of the roster, will simply look at that and say, well, that, and I'll use myself as an example, that Durango's only the champ because he's the booker. And that's, they say that because it's happened multiple times and will continue to happen. I've been somebody to say that a lot of promotions get started because somebody can't get booked anywhere. So they start their own promotion and make themselves the champion. So it does happen. And I think that perception exists for a reason. So I think it's really, really hard, and a booker has to proceed with extreme caution to, kind of distance from that perception so you can continue to lead the locker room. Or the other side is what happens is the booker knows that perception's out there and books themselves to their own detriment for fear that they will be seen as a booker that's putting themselves over. And I think it's a really tough position to be in when you're, what I'll call, to Canadian it up, to be a player coach. It's really hard to run the business while you're running the business. And then when you're a main event guy, it's very tough. When the booker's also a main event guy, he or she are going around and, dealing with finishes and dealing with questions about what, the order of the show and things like that. And everyone else in the locker room is focusing on their match. And that person spends the first, third or half of the show dealing with other people's matches, and then spends the last half of the show putting their match together. And there are guys that could do it, and our MRB is definitely one of them that does it fairly well. But I just think it kind of handcuffs you in a way, and I think that you can do both of those things well, and I believe you can do them well at the same time. But I believe that you're leaving a little bit on the table because it's hard to do both of them to the best of your ability when you can't really focus on either one. What I would also say is what I would also say on that is the other problem with booking and wrestling is that as the booker, you need to know what's working. So again, if you're booking an entire show plus trying to put a high level match together, it's very tough to do that and watch the matches. You can watch them back on video and stuff like that, but sometimes the live reaction is different and comes across different over a video replay. So I think that it's important for the booker to be able to watch what of their ideas, and this is where what storyline missed the boat and which one didn't. I didn't get to watch a lot of the ideas form because I would simply have to give somebody a finish, tell them what I wanted out of what they were doing, and move on to the next person, and didn't actually have time to go watch all the matches to see what worked and what didn't. And in that also, as a locker room leader, wasn't able to help young talent perhaps as much as I could with things I seen working, things I didn't see working, because sometimes when you're in the ring, obviously you see the match differently than someone sitting in the crowd watching. So I think there's a whole bunch of onion layers we can unpeel with a question like that. So yeah, that's kind of my answer there. My friend Ryan Carter, who's the best chiropractor in the world, but maybe one of the worst friends I have. Just kidding, I love you. He wants to know, where do I find golf shoes to fit my tiny feet? Do I find a better selection in the ladies section? I find this comment very hurtful and also uninformed, because Ryan, as anybody knows, if your feet are that small, you would shop for your shoes in the youth section, where the colors are much more fun and the shoes are about 30% less money. So if you're going to kill me with that joke, you got to make sure you should bring the youth section into it, because I like a good deal, and I'm shopping in that youth section with my tiny feet. Now my wife asked a question. Is there anything, I don't want to make sure I get this right, is there anything in kind of anything in my life that I would do differently? One thing in my life I would do differently, one thing in my life I would do the same. What I'm going to do with this question, because there's a low-hanging fruit answer to this, which is obviously the one thing I would do without question is marry you. That is by far the best decision I ever made in my life, was to marry my wife, Wendy. Anybody that knows even a little bit about me knows that's the answer. So I'm going to step by that answer, and say the one thing I would do again is definitely get into pro wrestling. Some of you may or may not know that pro wrestling wasn't something I grew up dreaming of doing. It was something I kind of fell into later in life. And I would definitely do it again. I would have no question. The juice was worth the squeeze for me. I loved every minute of it. I met so many good people in the wrestling industry. And I just think that, it brought so much to my life, not without sacrifice on my behalf as well as your behalf, Wen, but at the same time, I'm so much richer in my life for having had that opportunity to be a professional wrestler. And it's just, as only you would know, it's something that I just absolutely love doing. The one thing I would change is, and this is, just at a kind of knowing what hindsight being 2020. The one thing I would change is very early into my career, somebody with a fairly big name offered to get myself, my brother, and Pistol Pollock tryouts with the WWE. At that time, they didn't have developmentals. You know, if you know anything about how Edge first started out, it probably would have been something like that if you were to get signed at that time. But we didn't know anything about the business. So we turned down that tryout. And if I, hindsight being what it is, that was a huge, perhaps a huge mistake. But so I'd definitely take that tryout. That doesn't mean anything would have been different. That just means I would have took the tryout. So yeah, those are the two things, I guess to answer that question, that's about the best I can do there. David Bush asks, did I like wrestling at the Dome? Now, this isn't necessarily an advice thing, but I'm going to turn it into one. First and foremost, David, I absolutely loved wrestling at the Dome. And again, I can't thank first of all, the office at Prairie Wrestling Alliance, Kurt Sorokin, Nizar, Michael Richard Blaze, all you guys, for allowing me to be involved in that, as well as the Calgary Hitmen and Bret Hart for putting on this excellent event. I took a little bit of stick for quote unquote coming out of retirement to do this match. And I'm somewhat okay with it because it comes from a place of love, and B, I think it's funny. I don't, anybody that knows me know I love busting balls, so I can dish it out, and I definitely can take it. What would Duke do out of this would be, if you have a dream. I mean, and I didn't know it was my dream to wrestle in the Saddle Dome until it became an opportunity. Because to be quite honest, I just kind of never thought of it. Sometimes you don't dare to dream that big. I know that sounds weird, but when Kurt gave me the opportunity, it took me a long time. I took, over a day to kind of think it through, as well as come up with something that would be reasonably non-taxing on my body, which I think I did. And I'm sorry to disappoint anybody that was there. But if you get that opportunity, when opportunity knocks, and this goes back to my tryout, or simply being 49 years old and getting an opportunity to show up and work a crowd in the Calgary Saddle Dome, take that opportunity. Good, bad, or indifferent, you learn from it and you move on. But if I would have looked and said, oh, I'm too old to do that, or I would have missed out on a great day, and I couldn't be more happy that I did that, David. Thanks for the question. The Sinner, Aiden Pringle, asks, and this is there's a long story here that I won't get into. I'm going to have Aiden on the program, and we'll have this conversation. What if a couple greenhorns were asked to get a show over in Red Deer, Alberta? What would Duke do? And a little bit of laughter after. For those of you who don't know, Aiden and I were involved in a promotion called Western Canadian Extreme Wrestling together. So here's the advice part of that, Aiden, to be honest with you. And this is the God's honest truth, what went down with that show. At the time, there was people running a company that didn't know anything about wrestling, didn't understand about independent wrestling, and didn't understand how hard it was to make money on the road. At that time, we were drawing fairly well in Calgary, a decent paid attendance, but wrestling at that time was doing pretty well as a whole industry. The office at that time decided we were doing so well in Calgary that we should start running Red Deer as well, start running on the road. And as somebody that at that time had been on the road for, a couple of years and watched, some very good people with very good minds lose a lot of money, I kind of cautioned against it. In fact, I was, if anybody was at those meetings, and I think, Aiden, you might have been at some, I was not necessarily on board for running those shows. So my advice to you at this point would be, don't run that show. If you're gonna lose money, you might as well lose money at home. But I appreciate the sentiment where people want to have a wrestling company. I want to have a touring wrestling company, and you want to expand, and that's great. Having said that, when you don't have TV, or at that time, social media wasn't really a big thing. When you don't have these things to advertise your show, it makes it really hard to make money on the road. And I think there's some touring wrestling companies now that kind of understand that without, certain sponsorships or certain sacrifices by the talent, it's really tough to make money in another town. So I think that my advice to you at that time would have been, don't get involved, especially if you're putting a paycheck on it. Having said that, like I always say, chase that dream, because you never know when that show in Red Deer Could be the place somebody gets discovered or a kid gets their break. Excuse me. A blast from the past for some of you might know, actually, from Western Canadian Extreme Wrestling. Nice transition there. The pretty boy Chuck Biggs asks, what if Duke Durango woke up in a lavender field? If any of you watched a previous podcast with my brothers, my oldest brother really, really, really enjoys lavender for some reason. No judgment, to each his own, but yeah, lavender is just not, let's just say that's not a whole family thing. But Chuck asks, what would I do if I woke up in a lavender field? Well, the first thing I would do is kind of try and remember where I'd been the night before, because I assume if I woke up in a lavender field, I either drank way too much or I've been roofied. So I think that's about the best I can tell you about what would happen if old Duke Durango woke up in a lavender field. Something went drastically wrong. David and Thomas Bush also asked, would I like to travel? And a lot of the countries are in Europe, Germany, Poland, places like that. I would 100% like to go see the Eastern Bloc of Europe. I've been to Europe, but I've only been to Holland and Amsterdam, or Netherlands, sorry. So I would definitely love to see, that part of Europe. Again, what would Duke do is, if you ever have an opportunity to travel and go to Europe, or even just go see any part of the world where it's different from here, please go. It just changes your perspective. I think if you can afford to travel, do so. It gives you an idea that, while the North American way or the Canadian way is good, there's good ways to do things. There's better ways to do things. And then in other ways, you'll appreciate the way we do things in Canada. So, if anybody, my advice to you guys, if you have a chance and if you can afford to travel, do it while you're able-bodied. Do it while you can go see everything you want to see, because I just think that travel for education is important, but also, just getting away on that nice tropical vacation and turning your brain off for a week and sticking your toes in sand, that's also a good idea as well. And I would say after the last couple of years, and geez, what looks to be the next year or so going forward, I think we're all going to need a good vacation. A funny story that PWA promoter Kurt Sorokin, I won't get into the whole story right now. He says, if there was a misunderstanding at the box office where I yell at the poor senior citizen lady just trying to pay talent, aka Kurt's mom, I would never, ever yell at a senior citizen the way that somebody on the PWA roster whose name rhymes with Miss Real yelled at Kurt's mom for not getting paid on time. I think you should be ashamed of yourself, sir. I hope you have since apologized to Mama Sorokin, as we all affectionately call her. And I hope that we never see a repeat of these events, sir. Orest asked me a really kind of far out there question. This is a few years back. What were my immediate thoughts when his kid held up a sign saying "Dirty Duke the Mango"? All I can say is I like fruit, Orest. I've never been offended by a sign. Usually, if things like that will often have me biting the inside of my lip to not start laughing and break character. So yeah, tell your kid thanks. And what I would suggest to all you other guys out there and girls out there too is, the Duke Durango advice portion of this is, point out those kids with the sign, give them that emotional interaction and make them know that making that sign was worth it. And that's how you get over with the crowd and again, this is, but make that emotional connection with the crowd. Make sure that young kid that took the time to make that sign, to put your name down on a piece of paper, knows that you see it and knows that it draws a reaction, and you will make a fan for life. And Orest, actually, hopefully that theory holds true for your kid. Now, Rob Ward, who ran for alderman in the city of Calgary, and a lot of people may or may not know, he was our referee, young Fledge, for years in PWA. Him and I have spent a fair amount of time playing golf together, and have had some spirited debate over the years. He's somebody that I respect and admire, and quite frankly, he also just makes me laugh. But he probably asked the most difficult question on here, and this could be stepping in it, quite frankly. I'm going to just read the whole thing. He says he's asking this only because it's the hardest topic to discuss and he wants to see how I'll handle it. When has censorship or cancel culture gone too far? Do you believe we have become overly sensitive? It used to be that if you didn't like someone or something, you just didn't engage with them or it. Now it's all about, if I don't like them or that, it must be gone. And then he laughs and says, good luck with that one. If anyone can answer it reasonably, it's me. I actually took some time. One of the reasons I'm recording late is I actually took a lot of time with this question just so I could make sure I articulate my answer properly. To be quite honest, I don't know that there's enough time for me to answer this in the way I'd like to. Anyways, having said that, do I think cancel culture has gone too far? And I think that the question might be a little bit too simplistic. First and foremost, I am 100% for freedom of expression or freedom of speech. I believe that people do have a right to feel and say the things they want to a certain degree. But I also want to make it very clear, but I don't believe in freedom from accountability, and I don't believe in freedom from repercussion, in that you can say, I'll give you the rope to hang yourself with, and that I'll allow you to say whatever you want without you, say going to jail or, being legally held accountable for something you've said. Having said that, if you say something stupid and the great masses come after you for it, that's kind of the live by the sword, die by the sword philosophy. So I think that if you're going to say, what are, kind of what's saying, like, stupid actions get stupid consequences. So if you're going to make bold statements that are, maybe aren't well educated or well thought out, or you're going to act in a way that could come back to haunt you later, there's part of me that's, more so I'm about accountability than anything. If anybody knows me, they know that sincerity and accountability are two of my kind of utmost priorities in life. So if you're gonna talk a lot of shit, you should probably be prepared for the backlash, and some of it will be deserved. Now, are people too sensitive? And I'll address that part of the question. I do believe that people are too sensitive. I believe that people on a certain level, quite frankly, especially young white people, are looking for reasons to be offended. And I don't understand where it comes from. I don't, I'm not going to blame upbringing, and I'm not going to blame movies and video games. And because quite frankly, I don't have the answer. I would love to sit here and spew a bunch of psychobabble bullshit to give you the answer to that, but I don't understand why people are so sensitive. What I will say is, probably education plays a large part in that sensitivity, and that we know now that, certain things that used to be just written off as, say, boys being boys or kids being kids, now are recognized, simply as bullying or just poor behavior, bottom line. So I think that part of the culture has changed. Maybe there's an awareness that didn't exist before that creates, too much sensitivity. And I'll give an example of this, in that I used to be a bouncer in a nightclub downtown on Electric Avenue. And it was predominantly, it was a dance bar, which, to be fully and honest, was a black demographic that would come to that bar. And if I would have any type of altercation with any of the patrons of that bar, they would immediately call me a honky or a cracker. And I would, to be honest, I would laugh it off because I legitimately had no idea what it meant. So the words had no power to me. And it was good for me because they could say these things and I would never get upset, because I didn't give the words any power in my life, mostly because I didn't know what they meant. Now, fast forward to, I don't know, within the last couple of years, I did learn what those words mean. And I'm going to repeat it now, not because I think it's funny, but because I think that we need to know where this stuff comes from. So when someone does say these things to you, anyways, the word honky, from the way I understand it, is a honky was when a white person would go to a black neighborhood to pick up a prostitute, they would honk their horn to bring the prostitute to their car. And the way I understand it is that's where the word honky comes from. And if I'm wrong, if anybody understands it differently, by all means, comment on this video. Feel free to message me and educate me. But that's the way I understand it. And the word cracker, to me, is a little almost more offensive, in that what the cracker was the gentleman, was the person that would whip the slaves. It's the crack of the whip. And so when I found out what those words mean, quite frankly, it did give them a little more power in my life. It didn't become such a laughing matter that I'd been called those things, because there's nothing I want to be associated with less than somebody that acts that way. That somebody could live a life that could somehow possibly be associated or possibly be deserved to be called a honky or a cracker. So having said that, still, if you call me a honky or a cracker, will it make the hair on the back of my neck stand up a little bit? Yeah, I'd be lying if I said it won't. Would it cause me to react in an angry or violent way? It won't, because I know A, where it comes from, B, I try not to give simple words that much power in my life. And so I think that sensitivity can be okay to a degree, but I also think that, we can be oversensitive. And I do think that there are a lot of people right now that have reached that oversensitivity. My real issue with cancel culture isn't that there's accountability, obviously, in that I just said I'm somebody that's for accountability. My issue with cancel culture is this: if somebody assaults their wife, physically abuses their wife, and their workplace finds out about it and fires that person, was that deserved? Did what happened outside of work in their personal life have any bearing on what happens in their workplace? And does that behavior carry to the workplace? What kind of employee was this person to lose their job over what happened at their home? And that's not to say what happened to their home isn't horrible and disgusting. I want to make that clear. But what I'm saying is, do we draw the parallel? The next question for me on this becomes on a philosophical level. If somebody's a misogynist, if somebody's a wife beater, if somebody's, a racist, and they act in this fashion, and we take away their right to make a living, we socially destroy them, friends and family abandon them, do we believe that will make the person rethink their choices and become less misogynistic or less racist? Or is there part of that reaction that would cause that person to look at those people, quote unquote, taking those things away from them, and then say, well, see, I was right about you people? So I think that's a dangerous thing. So, if I fire a person because they act foolishly, is that the way to stop them from acting foolishly? Or would the way to stop them from acting foolishly be more to hold them accountable for the behavior, call out the behavior, but also work with them from a place of compassion and education? I'm not going to say I have the right or wrong answer here. I'm just going to say that I think completely taking away someone's right to make a living, say by canceling them, I think that's a dangerous thing. And I think that if people want to understand what creates extremism, is hopelessness. So when you take away anyone, be it a male or female, when you take away their right to make a living, you take away their hope for the future. And when you take away someone's hope for the future, that creates a different kind of monster. And I think that this becomes a really slippery slope. The other question I would ask when it becomes to cancel culture and sensitivity is, where's the grace? I can look at my past, and I'll use myself solely as the example here. I look at some of the things I've said and done in my past, and by today's standards, I think it would be safe to say I'd probably be canceled. And I believe that there's a lot of men and women from my generation that could probably safely say the same thing. But I also think there's a lot of women from my generation who have moved with the times and educated themselves and, saw the signs that what we were saying or doing was incorrect, and have worked earnestly to correct that behavior. And I think that's important to recognize as well. Not that there's not more work to do, but I think it's important to recognize that there's been steps taken and there's been a lot of work done. So I think that in that we need to treat each other with some grace and know that, we can all say things that are erroneous. We can all say things that we wish we could take back. And in fact, I know we all have. And so let's try to treat each other with the grace, and just putting yourself in that position of saying, hey, you know what, I've said dumb things too. And, fortunately the world wasn't listening when I said it. On the other side of that, grace becomes the road to redemption. So if somebody makes a racist comment, or if somebody makes a misogynistic comment, is there a road back? In that, is there forgiveness at any point for these people or persons that have done wrong, that have simply, let's just call it what it is, stepped in a pile of shit? And we've all stepped in those piles of shit. When I make a mistake at home, I have to go to my wife. I have to sincerely ask for forgiveness. And there's a conversation about, how I cannot repeat the same behavior and things like that. And those are important conversations to have. But I also think that it's important that we don't hang people on a mistake, or we don't hang people on something they said, because I think we're all more than the sum of a single action. And I've repeated this on my program more, and that we always, always, always judge other people by their actions. But when we're looking inwardly, we always judge ourselves by our intention. And I think it's extremely important that we start looking at everyone's intention before we go after the action. Second of all, we look at, is there a road to redemption for this person? Is their act so horrific that they're not allowed to be a member of our society anymore? In that, and if you're going to go that far, are we going to start hiring thought police? Is there going to be a point where they can go back 20 years and say, hey, you know what, you said something or did something really poor, and now we can actually charge you with that crime, or we can actually, hold you accountable? Because I think on a certain level, that's what's happening today, in particular with stand-up comedy. Comedians are trying to be held accountable for things they said on stage 10, 15 years ago when the culture was different. And that's not to say those things were right or wrong. I'm just saying that the culture was different. And you can't, when the line moves, you can't then go back and say, well, what you said 20 years ago that might have been borderline then is now unacceptable. And now you can't make a living today because of what you said 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I quite frankly don't think that's fair. And I don't think it's acceptable, because there's a lot of these people that are making these call outs now that are going to find out in 10, 15, 20 years, they've said something erroneous. And are they going to want that finger pointed at them in the same way? So, and that's where I kind of ask people to treat each other with grace. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about the cancel culture. I think people should choose their words wisely. I think that people should be very cautious not to judge. I think people should be very cautious, to coin an old cliche, to walk a mile in somebody's shoes before you start, kind of telling them how right or wrong they really are. And then most importantly, look at their intentions before you write somebody off. Let's look at their intention, not a single action, because, you're more than the sum of the single action. I like to think that all the mistakes I've made in my life have built the man I am today, which, not without flaw, obviously, but I'm pretty proud of who I am. The people around me know that they can come to me. They know I'm somebody they can depend on. And I think that all my life experience, good, bad, and indifferent, has built that. So I think it's important to, watch what you say, but also when you say something foolish, stand up, be held accountable, apologize, learn from your mistake, and move on from it. And that's a tough question. We could go all day about that one, to be honest with you. Philosophically, I think that where society is today is a really, really tough spot, because I think that the technology has moved much faster than the philosophy has changed with the technology, if that makes any sense. So we're very behind in a lot of social situations, simply because the technology has moved way beyond what we're geared to deal with at this point in our evolutions. And on that note, friends, I'm going to shut her down. I would like to thank each and every one of you for watching. I want to thank everybody for coming out to the Saddle Dome and watching the Battle at the Dome 2 and supporting Bret Hart Night. From what I understand, the auctions for the jerseys that were the game worn jerseys went excellent. And yeah, the last but not least, friends, men, ladies, early screening is the key. Stay on top of those prostate exams. Ladies, from what I understand, the most uncomfortable thing on earth. So I don't want to come across the wrong way here, but get those mammograms. Let's make sure each other's getting checked. Don't be ashamed to talk about it. Awareness is the key. If you want to go back a couple episodes, you can find where I talk about my first prostate exam. Quite frankly, not the worst experience, and I got a great story out of it. So to me, that was worth it. But gentlemen, it's blood work now. We don't have to go through near the discomfort that our lady friends do to find out whether or not they have certain cancers. So look after yourselves, do the right thing. Let's be aware.
Dude,
Thanks, everybody.
You suck.